you ever looked at a professional's build and wondered, why does that look so good? You sat down and recreated it block by block, and it still didn't look as good. It should look the same, shouldn't it? After all, the blocks are exactly the same. But are they really? Because it might not be the blocks of the build that make it look different. It's the blocks around them. The fact is, you've been making a critical mistake. You've been ignoring one of the most important details of the build. It's the thing that can make a good build, but if you ignore it, it can make a bad build so much worse. For many people, it can be the hardest part of building, but it's surprisingly easy, and you don't need much to enhance a build. It can be applied easily, but you need to know exactly how and where to use it if you want to bother using it at all. It's the part of building everyone needs, but everyone ignores: terraforming. While it can seem like a daunting task, it's surprisingly easy, and if you keep watching, you'll see exactly how to do it. The purpose of terraforming is surprisingly simple: to set the stage for your build. If the structures of a build are the actors, the landscape around it is the stage. Take, for example, this temple. Without any landscaping around it, this is just a temple. Without any landscaping around it, it is just a temple. Without any landscaping around it, it's just a temple. While it might look cool, many details about it are missing. However, the landscape around us tells us where it is. It sets the scene for this temple. We can tell that it is in an overgrown jungle and that it is clearly old. There are no paths or trails to it, and it appears to be abandoned. The landscaping shows us that it is some forgotten ancient temple left undiscovered until now. Also, the terraforming sets the atmosphere. The environment is crucial in determining the overall atmosphere of a build. For example, a haunted house is made much more foreboding by an overgrown cemetery next to it with dead, dark trees. Similarly, this build has a very ancient, overgrown, and undiscovered feel. With gradients highlighting its shadows and plants crawling over the walls, it is an air of mystery and undiscovered wonders. Its placement in a forest clearing makes a wandering adventurer seem to discover it, coming out of the trees of a dark forest into a brightly lit clearing, where an abandoned temple waits. At any rate, a small amount of landscaping around the base of a build is a simple thing anyone could do. A useful tip for this is to build your structure one block above the ground. Then, use this extra space to transition your build into the ground and surroundings. For example, you might make a small flower bed or add a foundation in a different block. Maybe you add an area where some weeds have been creeping up a wall. Whatever it is, just adding a touch of life at the base of your build can blend it beautifully into its surroundings without having to do anything else at all. But if you really want to unlock the true potential of terraforming, you need to create the full landscape around your build. This usually seems incredibly challenging and time-consuming, but there are a few general tips to remember. Whenever you are creating a landscape, you need to consider the large and small scale format. The large-scale terraforming will play a role in how your build is perceived and the general sense of it. For example, you might have built a Swiss-style ski chalet. The large-scale terraforming would consist of planning out a mountain rising above it, or where the tree line ends, or running a stream alongside the road down. For these cliffs, the large-scale terraforming is where the cave and arch are, planning the overall structure of the cliffs. When doing this, there are a few tips to use. The first is to plan out the landscape entirely. This might just be placing markers where mountains will go, or making a note of where the cave and arch will be on a cliff. The second is to utilize wireframes. When you have your mountain points and cave entrances plotted, just make a few lines leading up to them from the ground. It's especially useful to put these frames in places of interest, such as from the base of a valley to the top of a peak. On this cliff, the wireframes were placed in a few places of interest. First, the shape of the bottoms of the cliff were made, including the cave and the arch. Next, lines were made at points of interest. There was one here at the end of the line, a second next to the cave entrance, and a third on the other side of the cave. Then, the bottom of the arch, followed by the top of the arch, were shaped. When doing this, it's important to consider the overall shape of the build and to use the frame to accentuate the details of the build. Next, you need to fill in the area between the lines. To do this, just try to connect the areas between the frames, continuing the overall shape and structure of the landscape. The trick with this is just to do it naturally. At first, this would seem challenging and cumbersome, but if you keep practicing, it will come naturally. Make sure to just follow the overall shape of the build and to limit any straight or predictable areas to a few blocks. Then, you can just refine that shape with partial blocks like walls or slabs to use gradients to add depth and accentuate the shape of a build. Secondly, there are the small scale details. In this temple, this is just the plants, dirt, and vines. The small scale details are the general blocks and patterns that make up a build. This is what you will put over your large-scale structure. For example, small-scale details might be some rocks and boulders, the placement of shrubs and trees. In this build, we can see some vines climbing up a couple of places on the temple with some moss, bushes, and bamboo patches, and areas of uncovered dirt and path blocks. All of these are small-scale details. With these, it's important to balance them out. For example, there is not one area with way more bushes than the other. Large-scale patterns, like concentrating trees near a river or planting the bamboo in groves, can also be used to break up monotony. Also, it's important to space them evenly, but still maintain a natural look. If you are making a carefully tended garden, all of the plants should be evenly spaced, but nature is inherently chaotic. Thus, you should focus on small-scale patterns and make your landscaping look even on a small scale, but have an overall large-scale structure. Also, you should focus on having your intermediate scale details look realistic. For example, water will always flow downhill and follow the path of least resistance. Also, you should seek to show evidence of natural processes and understand how things look in real life. For example, we can see piles of scree built up at the base of this cliff. In real life, loose rock will fall down natural corners and chimneys in the rock and form piles at those places. You should always seek to portray natural details in a realistic way, unless you are going for a distinct fantasy style. It's also useful to understand general tips for all terraforming projects. One of the most important tips is to vary up the scenery. You should make your mountains or cliffs look varied and interesting, more so than in real life. It is especially important to avoid a flat or boring rock face, as this is usually an easy mistake. All mountains or cliffs should have lots of depth and detail, and should be more interesting than they usually are in real life. For example, this cliff has far more detail and extravagance than a normal cliff might. However, because these cliffs are not as expansive as in real life, you should seek to put more variety and interest in them. Also, you can use gradients to enhance the depth of the build, as you can see here. Also, in addition, you can overhang dirt or rock over the cliffs to make them look more interesting, as you can see here. You can even use coarse dirt behind the normal dirt to give it more depth and make it look more interesting. It's also useful to know which style of cliff or rock face you want. Consider, for example, mountains are generally more straight-edged and imposing, while seashores are carven away by water to form complex and varied structures, like in this cliff. Also, if you would like to support this channel and allow me to keep creating this type of content and see more videos like this, please do consider subscribing. Thank you. In addition, waterfalls can be used in adding details and focal points to a build. They can highlight and contrast cliff faces and can be used to add an interesting layer of depth and style to your builds. As you can see here, it can often be beneficial to darken the areas around waterfalls or other water features, such as shorelands. You can even build a color gradient from a darker color to a lighter color near the top. Waterfalls should have a significantly darker area near their bottom, especially on larger falls, to replicate spray. Also, you can use white glass, panes, and end rods to create a realistic spray at the base of a waterfall. Or, as you can see here, you can even use glass and various white blocks in a gradient to make the waterfall look especially realistic. Waterfalls aren't the only way to bring water into a build. Ordinary water features too can bring life to a build. After all, there is water almost everywhere on Earth, and ponds, creeks, and streams can add movement to a build and break up monotonous terraforming. Bodies of water should also have plants in them, and the bottoms should be realistic colors. Fountains can also add life to more manicured builds. As we can see here, they can be made with either glass or water, which should look smooth and symmetrical either way. Finally, unrealistic or fantastical details can be used to really improve builds. Stone pillars or fountains off cliffs can make them look more interesting. Also, when terraforming in survival mode, it can be useful to make everything out of dirt first, and then to replace it with other blocks later, as this will help make it more organic and easier to deal with. Finally, if you want to see more about how to use gradients in your terraforming builds, watch this video here.